and talk about some upcoming events at Square Books. All of these are virtual, but like this event, they're all very wonderful. So also, I'm Caitlin from Square Books. So glad you're all here. So Sunday, May 16th at noon, this is a ticketed event, but keep listening. Peter Wolleben and Dr. Jane Goodall are going to be in conversation for Wolleben's Heartbeat of Trees. You do have to buy the book to attend. However, if you buy the book, it will be a signed bookplate edition, and you'll get access to that book 2 weeks before publication day, and you'll get to hear them talk. It's a win, 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 win. Then Monday, May 17th at 5:30, we are in partnership with our friends in Jackson, Lemuria Books for Sean Flynn, in conversation with our own Amy Nezukumitato for Flynn's memoir, Why Peacocks? An Unlikely Search for Meaning in the World's Most Magnificent Bird. Then Wednesday, May 19th at 5:30, we have Maggie Shipstead. She'll be in conversation with Book Page Deputy Editor Kat Ackery for Maggie's latest novel, Great Circle. It's high-flying literary fiction. So be sure to check all those out. I'll put a little link where you can learn more about them. But enough about them. Let's talk about Jen and Chris. Tell you a little bit more about them, then I will go away. Jen Phillips is an award-winning author of Fierce Kingdom, and she actually visited Square Books for Fierce Kingdom. I think maybe for Thacker, maybe not. Yes, Thacker, Jen?
Just a separate event, I think.
All right, standalone event. She didn't need a house band.
I think for every one of my books, I've been there, I think.
Oh, all right. And so Hidden Summer as well, because she's the award-winning author of both. And she is joining us from Birmingham, Alabama, where she lives with her family and new puppy Pascal. Next, we have Chris Bohjalian. He's a best-selling author of 22 books, including Red Lotus, Midwives, and The Flight Attendant, which I'm sure everybody knows is an HBO Max limited series starring Kaylee Cuoco, and she was wonderful in it.
Wasn't she?
She was. I love her so much. His work has been translated into more than 35 languages, and he's also a playwright, Wingspan, and Midwives. I promised him I'd keep his bio short, but he's done so many wonderful things. So the last little bit is that he lives in Vermont and also has his own puppy, Jessie. All right, so now that you know about our authors and their pets, I'm gonna scoot out of here. Please submit any questions you might have for Jen or Chris in the Q&A, and I'll come back and we'll kind of moderate those after they've talked. Thank you all so much for joining us, and have fun.
Thanks, Caitlin.
And thanks, Caitlin. And I just got to say, I am a huge fan of Jen Phillips. I loved every page of Fierce Kingdom, and then I read Family Law and loved it even more. Oh my gosh, you are going to love Lucia. You're going to love Rachel, and you are going to love everything you learn about, well, divorce in another era, and my favorite thing in the world in a book, dread. When I read this, I was turning the pages so, well, ferociously. I just loved it. Congratulations, Jen.
Thank you, Chris. No, that's funny. I mean, it's funny too that your book, which I also loved, we can just gush back and forth. No, I mean, there's plenty of dread. Don't you feel like you sort of maybe write what you most like to read, that both books have sort of this encroaching dread, although you're I think the fact that potential witchcraft and murder is involved in yours is maybe upping the stakes a little bit.
There's plenty of dread in yours. I mean, oh my gosh, there are so many characters surrounding these two women who just hit me in all the best ways. Deeply uncomfortable. Creepy guy with a pool, creepy guy at the motel and at the hotel in Memphis. I mean, it was fantastic.
I think especially as a teenager, I mean, the world is full of creepy guys. No, I love, did I
Speaking
read?
as dad of a daughter, yes. Still there, Jen? I think we might have frozen.
All right. Well, Chris, you and I can talk while Jen gets all that. Oh, I heard a giggle. Okay.
I'm
Jen,
not
are we good?
sure.
Jen, you're back.
Am I
She's
back?
back. It's all good.
I'm
Welcome
not
back.
sure what happened there.
You've missed nothing.
We're talking. we were talking about, well, teenage girls.
Yes, but I think I was going to say I think with the last book about motherhood, it really got me thinking about my own childhood and particularly teenage years there. And Rachel's background, the teenager in my book, is fairly similar to mine. So yeah, a lot of her sense of the world and
Really?
sort of both, and both the sense of a very limited world with very traditional standards is there.
Is any of your mom and Rachel's mom?
The family, I think the family is, the personality of the mom is not particularly my mom, but I think my family, particularly women in my family, did have the same sort of list of rules that Rachel's parents have, of just the world is very dangerous. And so you really need to not push anything. Like, you probably don't want to travel, you don't want to go anywhere, you don't want to drive on the interstate. You certainly, for God's sake, don't want to go to the liquor store without a man with you. You never want to call a boy because that might make you the wrong sort of girl. And it took me a long time. I mean, one thing I liked playing with was it took a while, it took a little age to realize that's not how everyone is raised. It's part of the fun of playing with Rachel, of that notion of how do you get a different view outside of the one of your family?
Sure.
And it's cool. I like that with Mary Deerfield in your book, that it's even more constrict. I mean, how is she supposed to imagine some other way of being in the middle of
1662.
society?
1662 Boston. I've always been fascinated by Puritan theology. Imagine a world where Satan is as real as your neighbor, and you're constantly wondering, am I saved or am I damned? And whenever we go to witchcraft in America, we go right to 1692 in Salem. But 30 years before Salem, Hartford was hanging witches. In 1656, the governor of Massachusetts had his own sister-in-law hanged as a witch. So those were part of my way in, but the other way in, I think, is not unlike your ways in family law, and that's divorce.
Mhm.
I didn't realize that the Puritans divorced. 31 times in the 17th century, Puritan couples divorced. And there were 5 reasons why: polygamy, adultery, desertion, and you will love this when you think of the Puritans: impotence and cruelty. Of those 31 divorces, only 1 was for cruelty. But imagine that woman, Nanny Naylor, standing before the all-male, patriarchal Boston Court of Assistants and saying, I'm married to a beast. I understand that God gave man dominion over animals and husband dominion over wife. But I'm married to a terrible man and I want out.
No, the bravery of that. Yeah.
And there are some pretty damn brave women in family law.
Well, and I think the same things at play, I think too, in your book and mine, to some extent, that in the middle of that culture and in the middle of Lucia and Rachel's culture, there's that same impulse that humans have, I think, to just not believe the most terrible thing, to prefer to turn your head away from it, so that the characters in your book often would like to believe the man's not a monster, because life is more pleasant if there aren't monsters. It's more pleasant if the woman is lying than if the man is doing the things she says. And yeah,
You and I both could go. No, go ahead.
just that, and the same thing is that is partly what Lucia deals with her own parents too, is her mother would prefer to not think that there's such a thing as domestic violence, or that segregation was really all that bad, that she'd really rather turn her head away from the ugliness. And yet, yes, with that, of course, comes a certain price if you just refuse to see what's wrong in the world around you.
You and I both could have named our books hashtag I believe her.
Right.
What was the most surprising thing you learned when you were researching family law about divorce not too long ago, but not in the present?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of sort of all of it was tied. I didn't really realize that no fault divorce, which basically gave you the right to end your marriage without blaming someone, that really didn't hit until the 70s here. But there was so much else. For me, I grew up in the late 70s and 80s, and it was really shocking to realize, not like back in the frontier times, not back centuries ago, but when I was already alive, those kind of laws like that, if you were a woman who owned your own property, but you were married, until 1977 here, you couldn't sell your property without your husband's signature. He didn't have to own it, but he still had to sign. Or that until 79, if my child was hit by a truck and I wanted to bring a lawsuit against the driver or the company of that truck, as a woman, I couldn't do that. Only the father had the right to sue for injuries to a child, unless he was in a mental institution, a prison, or dead. So they give you that little out. And then it wasn't just Alabama. It was 1975 in Tennessee and Wisconsin before women weren't legally obligated to change their last name to their husband's name. So I think that recency, was crazy to me. And it struck me. What about you? I was really distracted by by the forks, which were fascinating, and all the guys. It's as creepy as I imagined. But yeah, what did you learn, especially about the devil? I feel like.
Okay, three things. First of all, if a woman successfully divorced her husband in the 17th century, she received 1/3 of his assets. I'm not saying 1/3 is fair, but it's more than I expected from the Puritans. Number two, the Puritans had unbelievably atrocious table manners. First of all, they drank beer like it was spring break in Miami. Secondly, they had plates for formal occasions, but usually they were eating out of trenchers, long rectangular pig's troughs that 2 or 3 people would share, miniature, that fit on a table. And third, they didn't use forks because the 3-tined fork, which was beginning to gain favor in Europe, looked too much like the devil's pitchfork. It was the devil's tines. So they didn't use it. So you got a bunch of drunk Puritans eating with their hands, out of trenchers, not using forks. And the third thing, on the one hand, it didn't surprise me, but it was astonishing to read all of the primary sources and the ledgers and to see that Satan is just real, a presence in their lives. They're not just viewing Jesus Christ as their Lord and Savior. They're viewing Satan as watching over their shoulder. And if you wanted to be hanged, basically be smart, strong-willed, opinionated, and female. That was the ticket to getting a noose around your neck. So when I was writing this book, what began as a book about divorce quickly became a book also about a witch hunt and a witch trial. The book has two parts. Part one is by design, the book of the wife. And part two is by design, the book of the witch.
Did you have that split from the beginning? Did you envision it from the beginning, or did you add it as you went?
I had no idea where my books are going. I began with a premise. Young, smart, Puritan wife has a beast of a husband who takes a fork, slams it into the back of her hand, and she says, "Enough. I want out." That's all I knew. And then I depend on my characters to take me by the hand and lead me through the dark of the story. And the more I researched, the more I went down the witchcraft rabbit hole. How about you? I mean, one of the things I loved about family law is the escalating dread and how these characters who you think you trust, you begin to distrust. Did you know where that was going?
No, I mean, maybe like you, I mean, I always start with the characters and the world building and figure out who are these people, and then usually figure out some wrench to throw in. So yours is the fork through the hand. I knew there would be a spray of bullets at Lucia's house at some point, but then I didn't know anything about what comes after them. I mean, that's sort of the fun part of the story. You figure out what wrench you throw into their ordered life, and then how do they respond? But I mean, both of us, I think, are playing a lot with fear and what you do with it, of the different responses.
I gotta tell you, that is a fantastic scene in your novel when Lucia and her husband and Rachel are just like hitting the floor in the kitchen as the bullets are flying. I mean, I was thinking both of Bonnie and Clyde and some of my favorite moments in Breaking Bad. It's just a tour de force of a scene.
Yeah, I mean, I always liked that moment of when everything you thought you knew shatters, and what do you do with it? Which happens to Mary Deerfield as well. That's when you get to the interesting part of the character, when Lucia's someone who really has never felt real fear. And then it becomes interesting of how she responds to it. I mean, it's one thing I loved about the Devil's Fork, that I love. On first read, you think, this is crazy that, how would you think a devil gets to you through a fork? And then you think about now the sort of things that are going around on the internet and what people are still spinning because they're afraid of what's different and what they don't know. And we have not moved past this. We still come up with absurd things to try to impose some false order, some sense of good and evil that's not really there.
I mean, Hour of the Witch is set in 1662, but it's weirdly timely when one of the judges on Boston's Court of Assistants says to Mary, "Thou art a nasty woman." The reference won't be lost on contemporary readers. And yeah, the Puritans had the stocks, the whipping post, the gallows, and we have Twitter. I mean, the human condition has not lost its ability to shame someone or Yeah, to her, or yes. I mean, isn't it interesting that when the governor of Michigan was pilloried by some legislators in Michigan, what do they call Governor Whitmer? A witch. I mean, we've got this trope of the witch. The witch is either the old crone with the wart on the nose living in the woods, boiling children, the Wicked Witch of the West, or she's the highly eroticized young woman. Think Samantha Stevens in Bewitched. But either way, the witch terrifies men.
No, I love, as I was reading your book, I thought again and again, I'm going somewhere with this, of something I read on Wonder Woman, the first Wonder Woman movie, of why the movie struck a chord was because it was a rare glimpse of a woman with a purpose who cared absolutely nothing about anybody else's voices and heard only her voice. So that if there's a scene where she's, say, trying to get through a revolving door with a sword in her hand, and everybody else is going, put down the sword, you can't take the sword in there. But she really doesn't care. She's entirely focused on the problem of, how do I get a sword through this revolving door? But I love that about Mary Deerfield, that she just through some hard core inside of her has a sense of, this is enough, and I will carve out some different life for myself, that that there's no model that feels unprecedented for that time, and yet totally believable that it is a voice inside, and yeah, I love that feels timeless as well.
Thank you. Yeah, I could say the same thing about Lucia, who is timeless. She's a woman of her era, a divorce attorney in a certain place and time, but I just fell in love with her for the courage of her convictions. I'm not feeling this, well, I'm feeling some pressure from others that I'm supposed to be a mom, but there are things that right now matter to me more. I mean, the thing about Lucia in Family Law and Mary Deerfield in Hour of the Witch is they both pass the Bechdel test. I love the Bechdel test. Alison Bechdel, you put two women together, and do they talk about anything other than a man? And if they do, it passes the test because it suggests they're not just this construct of, well, writers like me.
Yeah, both women. I mean, I think that's true that and that in part they have a strong sense of self that's enough to break loose of the culture around them. And both of them, you're talking about the witch stereotypes, that I think I had different stereotypes in mind, that I had a strong sense that there is this type that if you are a smart, ambitious woman, that you are then often, according to Hollywood or fiction, cold or unfeeling, or you've sacrificed something in terms of your relationships in a way that I don't think is that much of a trope with a man, who are allowed to be smart and ambitious and also warm and content. And that I really wanted Lucia to also have, she finds great joy and satisfaction in her work. She's also a pleasure. She's warm and loving and cares about her husband and the people around her. And, I felt strongly she's allowed to do that. She can also have work life and home life and be content with the life she's carved out for herself, as opposed to torn down the middle and constantly struggling. I increasingly am drawn to the idea of a woman who's happy with herself, which is okay to be.
You did something great in Family Law and in Fierce Kingdom that I just loved. What kept me turning the pages in those books was both character and dread. You do dread really, really well. Why do you think that is? I mean, you seem
Maybe,
so stable and together.
well, I think that's related, isn't it? That if you let people be content with themselves in their life, if you give them something they care about, and I do always think I'm more interested in good than evil. The idea of what it means to do the right thing is very interesting to me.
I'm more interested in evil.
Well, you do both well, and yet there's always this hope and optimism in the worlds you create. But I do think when you give someone what they really care about, when they have a stake in their life, then the dread really ratchets up a notch because there's so much at stake. If they don't care about anyone, if they don't care about anything, if they don't have some core, then really what is there to lose? Whereas I think when a character cares deeply and has something to lose, then the thought of it being pulled out from under them works better. I mean, I still always feel whatever you write, if people don't care, how are they supposed to be nervous? How are they supposed to keep turning the pages unless they care about the characters, which always drives the plot. You've got a lot of twists, and yet it always comes back to how much I care about Mary.
But I also love flawed characters, women and men who are imperfect. I mean, I can't imagine a library without Donna Tartt's The Secret History. Gillian Flynn's Sharp Objects. Tolstoy's Anna Karenina. When my father died, I came across this sweater box under his bed with the earliest short stories I wrote that my mother had saved. And then after she died years and years ago, my father had saved. And the earliest short story in existence I ever wrote, it's from the 3rd grade, there it is. The penmanship is really good. The story's really bad. But the last sentence just speaks volumes about the kind of books I would write. And this is the story, and this is the penmanship, and this is the last sentence of the earliest short story I ever wrote. The dripping stopped, and the vultures had their meals.
No, that's really good. That was
But that could have been in Fierce Kingdom. That could have, there are points of family law when I thought, okay, I'm really scared.
No, and the scaring is good. You're right. It's boring if someone's not imperfect, if they don't sometimes make mistakes. As long as those mistakes are, are genuinely made, or made in a way that feels
genuinely
like
made.
It comes from that core. I think my first story, which is back there somewhere, is also from the 3rd grade, and it is called Janet of the Jungle. And it does not have a great ending line. It mostly involves falling into cauldrons of snakes, and I can tell when I was watching it at the time. I feel like it does not give any indication that I might do this for a living.
Okay, I think next week when Square Books is talking about, with Jane Goodall, you need to be there. You need to be there in a cameo to talk about Janet in the Jungle.
I do love Jane Goodall's books as well, so that's not the worst idea.
Yeah, well, my next book, 2022, is called The Lions of Hollywood, and it's set in East Africa and Hollywood. So I'm all in for Janet in the Jungle.
Did I hear you did you start this book a while back, Hour of the Witch? Did you start it and put it down, or did you write it all at once?
I started it in 2001.
Okay.
And I was on a book tour on 9/11. I was on the tarmac in Denver. We never took off. I'd be stranded for a week in 8 days in a Denver hotel. And I wrote a lot of the book because anything was better than watching
The news.
over and over the video of the plane going into 2 World Trade. My wife used to work on the 104th floor there. Finally got back to Vermont September 19th, resumed work on the book, and I couldn't do it. I was too sad. It all brought me back to being far from home, alone in a hotel room in Denver. And so I wrote a different book. Cut years later, I write The Flight Attendant. I write The Red Lotus. And I'm looking what to write next. And we just moved. And I came across 130 pages of something called The Trials of Mary Deerfield. And I just read a few pages and I thought, wow, this kind of stands the test of time. And when I dove back in, I wasn't sad. I was invigorated. And it just felt like this is the moment for a smart, strong, opinionated woman to risk everything, even being hanged as a witch, to stand up for her rights and not to be a doormat.
No, I think that's right. That sometimes you get the seed of something, but the angle's not quite right. The timing shifts or your life shifts. I mean, I think only because I wrote Fierce Kingdom and started thinking about motherhood did I wind up thinking instead about the women who weren't related to me when I was growing up and what a role they played in showing me this much broader world and showing me all the other selves I might be other than the kind that my family was sort of steering me to. But sort of one book led to the other, even though this book has a lot of my childhood in it. But I couldn't have written it closer to my childhood. It would never have come about without the right amount of distance.
Lucia and Rachel are such wonderful characters. Rachel's mom is so friggin' fascinating. I mean, and then the secondary characters. Oh my gosh, I just savored all of them. Can I ask you a question about Fierce Kingdom?
Sure.
Okay, I love that book. The little boy, was he inspired at all by your son?
He is was exactly the same age as my son. And yeah, you know, I often say that all of my characters have some element of me, that they're usually a hodgepodge of people, but that one character, Lincoln at 4, is just completely taken wholesale from my child. I couldn't have made him up. 4 years old is just a strange creature that is a mix of, that is somewhere between baby and old man, with moments of real insight and just absurdity. And now it's one of the real gifts of that book for me, is that it captured him at 4. He's 9 now. He would tell you he's 10, but he's not 10 yet. He's not there. But it captured him and sort of preserved him in this snow globe. Granted, it's a snow globe that has active shooters and a life or death situation. But it also sort of keeps him there in a way that I would not remember as clearly if it were for the book. So yeah, that was in some ways what I most wanted to do, was try to capture a very specific time and moment of a relationship. Joan is some me, although she's plenty fictionalized too, but sort of just what 4 years old and mothering a 4-year-old feels like. For me, it still works, and it takes me back in a way that is that again is probably it's probably a strange thing to people reading the book, that I would find it so delightful to go back to this nightmarish situation.
2 of the most wonderful, ferocious, protective mothers in modern literature. Fierce Kingdom and Room.
No, and I loved Room too. And it was, I didn't necessarily have that in mind, but I love the tightness of that story
Oh,
too.
the books are so different, but what they
Mhm.
share in common is just spectacular, ferocious mother lions.
Well, thank you. Caitlin, I noticed you're back.
Hi.
Hey, Caitlin.
Hi.
Long
No,
time
I'm
no
so
see.
sorry to interrupt. I could listen for hours and hours. We do have just one question so far. So if anyone's got something you're just dying to ask, now's the time. But it's a good one. So Brenda would like to know, she says, both of your books have strong women. What is difficult to write about characters from the opposite sex or the same sex, totally different from you?
Jen,
So
Jen, do you want to go first?
That one's largely for you, actually.
I
It
think it's
kind of
gonna
is.
And
be
I'm
Technically.
really curious about your answer. I have an answer too, but I feel like it's
Oh.
more your wheelhouse.
I do write across gender a lot, going all the way back to midwives. You know, certainly flight attendant, Hour of the Witch. My daughter, who's way smarter than I am, she's been reading my book since 8th grade. She once said to me after reading Close Your Eyes, Hold Hands, Dad, take this as a compliment. But I think your sweet spot as a writer is seriously messed up young women. She's on to something important. And I'll tell you something else. I never said this publicly until last week, but I'll say it again now. Why not? When my father was dying in 2011, and he took a long time to die, a year, he was in Florida and I was flying from Vermont every 3 weeks to spend 3 or 4 days with his doctors and him and check in. You know, my mom died half my life ago, so my father had been alone. And at one point, my aunt, his younger sister, said to me on one of those visits, "Oh my God, Chris, thank God you are the daughter my brother never had." And it's just one of the great compliments. And when I write across gender, I begin with the universals, what links us as humans, and then I begin to layer in the gender specificities. And I've been really lucky that I've got 3 really smart women in my life, my lovely bride. We've been together since we were 18 years old. And Victoria has read every word I've written. Our daughter, Grace Experience, who's read, you know, been reading my books and critiquing them since 8th grade. And my editor at Doubleday, Jenny Jackson. You know, I'm just so grateful to have these smart women in my life.
I'm going to chime in and just mention that Chris's daughter, Grace Experience, also does the voice for Rachel in the audiobook for Family Law, along with Jocelyn Jackson does the Lucia voice, but it is such a good audiobook. Like it's real, they do such a spectacular job. So, and I'm really bad of not listening to my audiobooks because the first one, my first book, The Well in the Mind, was set in the South, and the Southern accents were so bad that I couldn't listen to them. But this one is just wonderful. Grace is wonderful.
Grace Experience was so honored to get to do that. She loved bringing Rachel to life in the audio. Thank you, Jen.
I heard just the little sample and was like, that is perfect. Like it doesn't sound like Daisy Duke at all. And is just still, I mean, Rachel has a real charm to her and quirkiness that Grace gets really well. So yeah, it's a pretty cool overlap.
And you know, and she's also Mary Deerfield in Hour of the Witch.
So
I can't tell you the book
there's a
she's recording
lot
right
of
now, but yeah.
a lot of threads.
But yeah,
coming.
it's how she's kept her. It's a young actor audiobooks, which she's always loved, has been one of the ways she's kept her sanity with theater shut down.
Mhm. I'll give my answer, which is not as interesting as Chris's, because I don't write. There have been there have been male voices in my books. There is a male, one of the characters in Fierce Kingdom is a teenage boy. And in my first book, The Well in the Mine, two of the characters are men. But, yeah, surely that's true for most people, that I'm first just write it as a human, that there is some common core that I assume. If I'm writing a coal miner from 1931 in my first book, that what I really think about is he loves poetry. He loves words. Now he spends all day underground. He spends a lot of time in the garden when he gets back. But there is one line in the book. The kids have Lita's eyes, dark eyes, rich like good soil, I think. But anyway, that one line came to me and it was really clear. That's who Albert is. No one else in this book would talk like that. He is someone who sees, when I say he likes poetry, and maybe more than words, I mean, he sees the small moments of beauty around him. Everything else gets layered on top. There's a lot about coal mining. There's plenty about physical aches and pains. He has a certain assumption that things should go his way, that he should be able to fix anything that needs fixing, that might be more appropriate to a white man of that time. But still, the core of him that brings him to life is sort of one line and this sense of the beauty around him. So, I think too, if I'm writing a man, I might layer something else on top of that, but there is always that one moment where you get it in a way that's usually not about gender at all.
That makes a lot of sense, because I feel like for both of your books, like the characters kind of feel like old friends by the time you're finished. So you're really kind of getting best of both worlds, because you kind of get the thumping in your chest, but they stay with you, and you just kind of, I don't know, it's really kind of quite the accomplishment for both of you, kind of finding that sweet spot between the flipping the pages madly, but also just not really wanting to let these people go, even if you only spent 12 hours with them, because you can't put the book down. So kudos to you both. That's hard to do, I imagine.
That's exactly what you hope for.
Thank you.
That dynamic, exactly. That you want to turn the page and you want to slow down at the same time.
Mm-hmm. You're just like, no, but then you just keep going. So we're kind of running out of time. I think this is a great question. It's from Raina. She says, Chris, that she met you on tour for flight attendant. So hello. And
hey, Raina.
What and I think this is a good question for both of y'all, and kind of a nice place to wrap it up. Who do you like to read? Who are you an evangelist for? Who do you return to, or however you want to answer it? I think these are always, I love hearing the answers to these.
I'll answer, because I thought you disappeared for a moment. I was going to answer that first. I love Elizabeth Strout, everything by her. Penelope Lively, British writer who has never quite caught on quite as much here, but Anne Patchett, but sort of, I love a perfect sentence that makes me feel, and I love characters who I feel deeply connected to. Those I come back to again and again. And I will put in one plug for Susan Connolly's book, Landslide, which came out in the last couple of months. Is my favorite book in a while. I hadn't read her before, and it's a beautiful book about motherhood and family. So you should buy it.
I'll drop a link.
I always am worried when I answer this question, because almost all my friends are writers. So instead of saying, who are my favorite writers, Here are some of my favorite books I've read this year.
Okay.
Family Law by Jen Phillips. Dusk Night Dawn by Anne Lamott. The Committed by Viet Nguyen. Coming out this summer, The People We Keep by Ali Larkin. Homeland Elegies by Ayed Akhtar. The Water Dancer by Ta-Nehisi Coates. The Resistance Network by Hachig Maradian. The Ancestor, new in paperback by Danielle Trussoni. And Eternal by Lisa Scottini. The Queen's Gambit by Walter Tevis.
That's a wonderful little library just right there between the two of you. I'm so sad that we have to wrap this up. This has been such a delight, and I hope everybody else felt the same way. But before we go, I just want to do another kind of shameless plug for both of these books. We'll start with Jen. So I was thinking about kind of how these two books tie together, and y'all both did such a wonderful job kind of talking about them. So we have signed book plates for Jen's book. This one doesn't have one in it because I borrowed it to read, but we do have them at the bookstore, and I've dropped a link in there several times. And then we've got signed copies of Hour of the Witch. Chris got a really lovely signature. Thanks for taking the time to a lot of them are just scribbled.
My mother is smiling at my penmanship from heaven.
And I do want to just remind y'all that without y'all, our readers' supports, we couldn't have events, virtual or otherwise. So if you are interested in these books, they're readily available at squarebooks.com, in person, online, over the phone. We would love to put these books on your shelves. If you're finally taking that first vacation after a very long year. I think both of these actually would make really nice companions for your carry-on, your beach bag, or even just your back porch. Just wonderful, wonderful friends to take along with you. I so appreciate you both for taking the time to do this and spend an evening with our readers. I wish we were wrapping this up at City Grocery right next door to the bookstore, but next book, when the world's a little more normal.
Next book.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you so
Jen,
much. Thank you, Chris. And everyone
Caitlin,
out there.
Thank you so much. Jen, thank you so much. This has been a hard year. By the time we're done, we will have lost the equivalent in population of the state of Vermont. And among all the frontline workers are, well, people like you, Caitlin, and Square Books, for whether it was curbside delivery, pickup, getting the doors open safely. Thank you for keeping us sane. Jen, thank you for another great book.
Thank you. Thank you for tonight and for Hour of the Witch. This was a joy.
Truly. And yeah, I know this is like kind of cheesy, but it is this kind of like wonderful ecosystem. I say this a lot at these events, but it's always true. Without y'all writing books, we'd have kind of nowhere to escape to, or that empathy builder. And without our wonderful readers, we wouldn't, be here either. So we're so grateful to all y'all, and look forward to doing this again soon. So I guess good night. There's no easy way to end these. It's always abrupt. But
Good night.
Thank
you.
Okay, see y'all.